All right, so this is a great honor to be able to speak with you, Skye. Finally, we meet again, even though we're a continent apart. I'm here in Austria, Vienna, but honestly, it's a great honor to be able to speak with you about this amazing film, Hunger Award. I was deeply moved when I saw it. To be honest, it took me some time to be ready for it. It wasn't like something easy to just say, oh yeah, let's watch Hunger Word next in line or whatever. It was like, I knew this was going to be a very serious film, tough to watch. I watched it with my wife and I was truly blown away by it. And I couldn't speak really for a while because it's so touching and moving. And it's like so important that filmmakers like you do these kinds of films and take the risks that these films, that come along with films like that. And I was immediately wondering, how did you even go about this? And I had so many thousands of questions actually. So this is a great opportunity to just kind of chat as filmmaker to filmmaker on how does something like that come together. So
Yeah,
very happy to
yeah.
do this.
Thanks a lot for talking, Richard. It's really an honor to speak with you because your own work, especially in Sea of Shadows, has really resonated with me. And
Thank
I thinking back to that film, I wonder if I think we have probably some shared visions as filmmakers, and maybe because we're both DOPs, right? Maybe because we both sort of
you.
actively operate the camera. I think your films are really visually driven, and I really appreciate that when a filmmaker, uses the medium in such a visual fashion, because I think that's the strength of cinema, right? Is to tell stories visually, and when we do that, I think they can move people in a different way.
Exactly, and that's what I liked about Hunger Ward when I saw it, is you took a very cinematic approach, and you got incredibly close to the characters at the same time. So, I was wondering, like, how did you all plan this? Because it's so hard to do your research. It's not like let's go on a research trip and kind of find a great character, amidst like war-torn Yemen where bombs are, flying through the air and rocket fire and all these things. So I was thinking, I know how hard it is to, when you have a very tough topic and it's dangerous to be there. I mean, every day that you're there, your family's going to be worrying if you're okay, if you'll be fine, if something's going to happen, if they will ever see you again. So the first thing was like, how did you even come across this idea and then go about it? Like, was your target to kind of find that emotional focus, like find a character that you could speak to? How did it begin?
Yeah, it's there were a lot of barriers, right? A lot of barriers to doing this project, um, and a lot of them just revolve around access, access to the country, and then access to freedom of movement once we're in country, because there's so many different militias and warlords and factions who control different parts of the country that we had to be very judicious and very careful anytime that we moved within the country. So we had a satellite tracker that we had with us, a communicator, so that we wouldn't rely upon cell towers, because the cell towers are controlled by the Saudis and the UAE. And so
Mm.
any communication that goes through those towers is often intercepted, and they can basically read or listen to anything you do. So from a communication standpoint, we had to really think about digital security with Faraday bags for our drives and our laptops and so forth. And so that was one piece of it, right? So not only digital security, but the physical security of our crew. But then there was the larger sort of 30,000-foot view of just getting into the country. The reason that you don't see films coming out of Yemen is because journalists and filmmakers in Yemen are actively detained, killed, and disappeared. And then they don't want outside journalists or filmmakers coming in to really get access to the horrifying truth on the ground. which is that, there's a human caused famine that's killing people. So that piece of it took a long time just to get into the country. And we had sort of a parallel track where we had to work for over 8 months to get the visas, both from the Houthis in the north and from the Hadi-controlled government in the south. So there were a lot of issues every step of the way, and we had to be really careful about how we went about it.
But did you know where to go? Like, did you understand, I want to go to this ward where,
Yeah.
this famine ward where they're feeding, like, did you focus in and say, this is my film? Or did you say, there's a famine going on in Yemen, there's a big war, the US is involved, we're responsible partly for what is happening there. So let me do a movie, like, I mean, where do you actually, because that's sometimes for me super hard when I when I look for an important topic I want to talk about. I just, I just like, where do I even start? It was the same when I did the Ivory Game. There was an elephant crisis. They're getting slaughtered all across Africa, but that's it's a very big continent. There's dozens of countries where you could even start. There's amazing stories that you could follow in Namibia or in Kenya, whatever. But it's just like, where do you even begin? So did you have a straight plan?
Yeah, we did, and we kind of had to, because we knew we were going to have limited time in country, because once you enter the country, you can only really be there legally for 30 days as a journalist, and then they'll either jail you or kick you out of the country. So we knew we had this really, we had to shape our production to the fact that we knew we could only be there for 30 days, and so that meant that. For about 8 months before, I was busy building relationships with both the nurse and the doctor that we focus on in the film beforehand. One, to get permission from the administration to be in those two hospitals and clinics, right? But also building relationships with Makia and with Dr. Al Sadiq via email, via text, via WhatsApp, right? To sort of keep my finger on the pulse of what they were facing leading up to when we arrived, but also to really build the relationship, right? And to share with them what we were trying to accomplish, that this was really an attempt at humanitarian cinema, right? This was an attempt to go in and cinematically cover the effects of the war through the eyes of these two healthcare workers, which were trying to intervene in their own small medical way.
And were you worried about security in that way as well? Because if you were communicating from the US with someone in Yemen, obviously you must worry about, the communications being intercepted and there being, okay, what's your agenda? Did you have to hide your true intention of how you're going to portray this war? Who are the good guys, the bad guys? Did you use Signal, or I don't know, like, how did you go about that? It's a big worry I always have when I talk to sources in a place of conflict. How do you protect them? Because they just get, you walk away, they just get murdered because the bad people know about it. And then
and that was one of the reasons why I chose to sort of do the story the way I did, which was through two women healthcare workers who I didn't think would be a target of the Saudis or UAE or other warlords because of the work they're doing. Both women are deeply respected in their respective regions of the country. But that said, of course, I wanted to ensure this was something that wouldn't put them in danger. And so we had those conversations beforehand, and we communicated, both via Signal and WhatsApp from afar. And then that changed once we're in country, because we wanted to make sure that we were using different phones, right, from different addresses. So I came in with a fresh, clean phone, as well as a local mobile with a local SIM card that hopefully couldn't be easily traced. And then, so while we were in country, we didn't use email addresses that had been used before. We didn't use phones that had been used before, for all these reasons, right? Because at least you need to make an attempt to ensure that, if you are intercepted or if your phone is compromised, it's a fresh, clean phone, right? And there's nothing that can be taken that's of that you need to worry about.
I'm just smiling because immediately an anecdote comes to mind when we were in China, in Beijing, and we were shooting undercover there, some illegal traffickers, and then
The
the
Ivory Game?
police and people. Sorry, yeah,
The
in the
Ivory Game?
Ivory Game, exactly. And then suddenly we were compromised, and the people suddenly, told us, you got to get out of the country as soon as possible. And I remember how we all had these mobile phones, local SIM cards, and the first thing we did is like in the movies, you open the phone, you take the SIM card, and you break it, and then we dropped it into a water canal, and we left that same night, and we were hoping to get out with our footage. And I
Yeah.
just like suddenly remembered that. And it's yeah, you have to worry about those things because it becomes very real very fast
Yeah, yeah.
if they
The
if they
only
track you down.
communications that I felt confident in were the ones that were going directly to a satellite, frankly.
Yeah.
Because those are so much harder to intercept. And so that was the only thing that I felt with full confidence wasn't being intercepted. So you just have to communicate very carefully, you know.
Wow. And how do I mean, this film is so personal, and I was wondering what it must have been like once you're there. I mean, we normal people have never seen famine. They have never seen, like, I have never seen a starving child on the level that you have seen there. I've seen them, I've been to the refugee camps in Somalia, for example, 2 years ago, because I'm planning a movie there as well on the Kenyan border, and I saw starvation, but not to the point what you have seen. How did you emotionally, like, deal with that? Like, how do you process this? Is I don't know. How do you do it?
Yeah, it's a good question, Richard. It's a hard thing, right? I think it's a hard thing as a human being, as a dad, to see any child in such a state, a child who is suffering so greatly from a simple lack of food. So I'd be lying to say it didn't affect me. Sure it does, but it should as well. And so um, the camera, as provides you know um, it provides a certain way to experience what was happening in the room.
I,
And
I always see it as a shield in
yeah,
a way, because you have
sure.
this thing where sometimes you can say, I'm here to do a job, and it kind of separates me from this real thing. But please continue. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it can serve that function, right? And yet at the same time, I felt really strongly that we didn't want any unnecessary separation just because of the absolute privilege and the privilege of access which we were being given to be there, which was so delicate and so carefully built on trust over time, because we spent on and off a month in the Southern Hospital with some of these same families who had children in the hospital for the entire month. And so it was trust that we built over time. And so and when you marry that with the fact that I really wanted the film as much as possible to be intimate and to be immersive, when something really delicate and nuanced was unfolding, I didn't want to turn away, right? I wanted the camera to keep rolling and to be there in the moment with the family. So hopefully that that would translate right in the film as well. If you don't turn the camera away, if you don't do an edit, I think it's a different experience, right? And so what that did to us as filmmakers is that we really felt a part of those experiences on a really intimate level. So when a mother started to grieve when her child died, that was hard, right? We were right there as she went through that process. And so we would go, we would finish up each evening and go back to where we were staying, and you had to really think through it and find some way to process it. And so for me it was just knowing that whatever challenge it was to process such grief and despair, that we'd been given such privilege of access that there was a big responsibility there to take that right and do something of meaning with it, which is what the parents and the families wanted us to do, which it's why they had allowed us to be there in the first place. So I think that that responsibility that built over time as we filmed was really a motivator for me. It actually helped me process it in a
Mm.
meaningful and positive way.
Did you have moments where you felt it's it's at the brink of being inappropriate for you to still roll, where you're like, I can, should I really keep on rolling? Should I really keep that camera in that woman's face as she goes through that grief? Um, are you torn sometimes to just like keep going, or do you sometimes be like, okay, this is your moment. I'm gonna walk. I'm gonna leave you now. Like, you know, because
Yeah.
that's sometimes being a director and cinematographer at the same time. You are, it's in your hands. How far do you take it, and when is it too much or not? If you're working for, you know, with a director and he requires you or he wants you to do things, you can say, well, he wanted me to, but here it's your choice. Did you have moments where you were like, oh God, should I keep rolling?
Yeah, well, that's a complicated question. For me, it's about consent, right? It's about does this person want me here? Are they okay with me filming this? And the last thing I want to ever do is create a film that is in any way, shape, or form gratuitous, right? I want to make sure that whatever I capture and render and keep in a film um, shows dignity and respect for those that we're collaborating with. And I use the word collaborating very consciously because that's how I think of it. I think of it as an active collaboration. And so, yes, there were tough moments, but I listened to those that I was collaborating with in order to make those decisions. And because we had spent so much time with the families, um, as we actively checked in with them as they're going through these things, there was really only one moment during the entire shoot where one of our collaborators wanted us to stop and asked us to stop, and we did. And interestingly enough, later in the same day, she came to us and said we could start again, right? So she'd gotten through that really difficult moment for her where she was grieving the loss of a child. And then she thought about it some more and she came back and she was okay with it again. So there was that one moment and we just listened. And so we stopped for that period of her grieving process. And then when she was ready and we didn't know she was going to be, then we started again. So to me, it's dynamic, right? It's not a static
Mhm.
situation. It's something you listen and respond to in the field as it happens.
Mhm. Yeah, I can relate very much to these feelings that can arise when you're in this incredibly emotional, you know, world. I
Yeah.
mean, their child is dying. It's kind of the worst possible scenario of any parent. And there you are with the camera documenting, doing your job, but you also, you know, you have to also be a human being and be like, okay, where's borderline? How far can I take this, or should I? It's not about how far can I, because that implies you want to take it further than necessary. But like, I was thinking about that sometimes. You know, when I was watching your movie, I felt, could I have zoomed in, or could I have kept on rolling here? It must have been tearing you apart inside as this was going on, because you're there, and then, but you have a job, you have a duty, and if you don't do it, the world will never see it. And that's what sort of keeps me going sometimes, you know, when I'm in moments like that. And I have been, not nothing like with a child dying, but other extreme moments of grief, and it just tears you apart as a filmmaker, I think,
Yeah,
sometimes.
no, you're right. It does. And I think of Salha, who is the woman who we show near the end of the film after the death of Kakana, the last child
Mm.
in the film who passes. And she's one of the workers on that ward. She's not a family member, but she sees so much suffering and so much grief that, when the camera follows her into sort of the food or the milk preparation room as she breaks down, that moment was tough for us, right? She's someone who we'd been working with for a long time, and she just started crying. She just started breaking down because she'd worked so hard with that family to try to save that child, and to see her pass after spending so much time on that ward was really difficult for her. And you know, if we hadn't spent so much time with Salha leading up to that moment, there's no way she would have allowed us to film that. But
Mm.
because we'd spent the previous month with her, there was enough trust there, that she was okay with it.
It's great, because I always think when with any of my films, I really want to become very close to my subjects. Like I want them to feel I'm part of their family almost, you know, like they forget that there's a camera and they just like they are themselves and you're in their world. And I think for me, and I was wondering how it is for you, but for me, sometimes what I think what makes my films intimate or in some way special, or I hope at least that they're somewhat special in that way, is that I'm in the moment when it happens. And when you're a director, cinematographer, you can do that. And the most ideal scenario is when the character that you're following forgets that there's a camera on your shoulder.
Yeah.
They just see you. They are communicating with you as a human being and as a friend and as a trusted friend, and the camera becomes invisible. Although it's there, it's suddenly gone, and you're in the moment, and you can decide where to point your camera and how to go in intuitively. You're like dancing around the scene, right? But it's your choice. And how is it with you when you have this relationship? How do you play with the camera? What does it become, and how do
Yeah.
you use it as a tool or
Yeah.
work with it with the characters?
Yeah, I was curious your take on this too and some of your work. So let me share with you how we did it in Hungerword. I'd love to hear how that sort of matches up with your approach. So, um, you know, my paradigm for this film really, in order to get it done and to make something as immersive um, and intimate as possible in a conflict zone, right, was to be a really small crew. That's the only thing we could do,
Mm,
right? Because we could only get 2 visas, and we had to keep our crew as small as possible to protect our collaborators. And so we had 1 field producer and then 2 DPs. So my paradigm is 2 directors of photography. I'm the director and a camera person, and then I have a DOP, right, who's serving in that function. So there's 2 people who shoot a lot, right,
mm,
um, that roll all the time, and we sort of pair that with small high quality cameras. So I used a new camera that I hadn't used before, and then one of the things that we struggled with was I really would have loved to use primes on this, but I felt like there was just no way we could really afford that extra luxury in this case, because we were going to be in these small spaces where we couldn't afford to be moving all the time to disrupt a really intimate moment. Or when
mm.
there's a child who's having CPR done, you know, we needed long lenses sometimes too to access some of this. And so I knew that we were going to have limited lensing. So we really went with small, high quality full frame cameras um, with zoom lenses. Despite the
Mhm.
downside of that, I knew that we were going to need that kind of flexibility in these small spaces so we wouldn't have to be moving all the time. So that was sort of part of our tech setup, knowing that we had to cover this in a really particular way. Just 2 people, 2 cameras with
Yeah.
zooms. So
Wow. And you did the sound as well
yeah,
yourself. You
yeah,
mic'd them up and then figured that out.
yeah. That's, you know, I didn't want a boom pole. A boom
Yeah.
pole would have reminded people the entire time that we were filming. As you noted before, the whole idea was to be there long enough so that we started to blend in,
Mm.
regardless of whether we're just in the corner of the room not moving. And a boom pole gets in the way of that for me. And so despite the fact that my sound mixer always hates me, when I later show up and post, it's part of my approach. So yeah, we always have you know, 2 lavs hopefully that are on, and then we have a
Mm.
shotgun on each camera, so we have theoretically 4 audio sources at any time pulling in audio, and so that's always a mess. But the big upside to it, right? The big upside is that it's just 2 human beings we have to think
Of
about
course.
navigating the space, and no boom pole to remind people constantly that we're filming.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's funny because I also work with I always have a second cinematographer with me, if at all possible. Sometimes it's not because of limited space, but like I remember in Kenya, sometimes I would have to take a plane. There's only one seat. We're going up to Marsabit, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and we'll be there for a week. And I'm just like, okay, should I even go? Should I go on that adventure by myself, responsible for everything? But I did, and then you improvise, and of course, you get special stuff this way. But usually, whenever I can, I shoot with a second DOP, and
Yeah.
he can cover for me if I need to take over. If the directing becomes overwhelming, you just gotta focus. You have a problem, you still have a camera rolling. But also, what's great is that it gives you this in the moment feeling, because you always have a second angle to cut to. You never have to repeat anything. You never have to slow down anything. You will
Exactly.
get your coverage.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, for me, one of the most important techniques is to never, ever slow anything down or interfere in
Exactly.
what's going on, so they forget you're there.
Yeah, yeah,
You're
you're not
there, but
stopping
you're
the
not in
moment
their
flow.
way.
Right, you're allowing them to
Exactly.
do whatever they need to do, and you're just following it. And that
Right.
does, it allows things to unfold in a natural and organic way, right? Which is really
Right.
important. And so I really, what you said about working with another DP really resonates with me. So the key part of that for me is I love being able to, as a DP, I love being able to hand that over to the other DP and just think as a director, right? It really
Right.
frees up my headspace in the
Yeah.
field to know that my DP's there working, getting the stuff that I don't have to be thinking about getting at that moment. And then I can relationship build, right? And I can think
Mm.
as a director about what are we missing? What's another way that we could cover this? Do we need to cover this narrative versus this narrative? And that
Mm.
freedom that of headspace really makes a difference. I think it allows us to be much more effective and efficient in the field, and actually go after more narratives as well, because I don't have to be thinking I should be getting that shot all the time, right?
Yeah. 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 For sure. No, I think it's a great way. Now, let me ask you something else. How did you plan on making this film watchable? In like, did you have a certain plan or something in mind on how you will make it? Besides, I need to do some beautiful shots, right? But like, was there a bigger plan behind it? And I just give you a little example from my side. When I started working on, before I even started working on the Ivory game, I realized nobody will ever watch the movie if I show blood.
Yeah.
If I see an elephant get slaughtered, which so many other documentaries that I've seen on TV or something, they show that. They show the goriness and everything to shock people, to make them understand how terrible this is, that they're killing those beautiful species. I noticed that everybody will turn the channel, or would just kind of like, ugh, like, yeah, I feel for it. This is so horrible, but I couldn't watch it. Or they're so afraid of, even if they see that in a trailer or if they hear about it, oh yeah, you see an elephant get chopped to pieces, they'll be like, I'm not going to watch the movie. So, taking that to Hunger Ward, obviously, when I even heard about it and I knew it was about famine and these starving children, images come to your mind that you will just not want to see, because they hurt so much. So, what was your game plan in making the movie accessible to millions of people? Because obviously you want this out in mainstream, ideally, right? You want millions of people to see this, not just a fraction of those who are knowledgeable anyway, who are already the supporters, the NGO workers or whatever. Like, you want everybody to watch it. Did you have a bigger plan?
Yeah, I mean, you've just touched upon one of the big challenges of the film. Um, I am a deep believer that images galvanize. That what we can do as filmmakers has a power that many mediums don't, especially the moving image, because it captures experience in a different way, in real time. And so
Mm.
I go into all my projects knowing and thinking about that. And in this one in particular, I knew or anticipated that there would be really difficult content. I didn't know that children would die on camera in front of us. Certainly, I certainly hope that wouldn't happen, but it did. And so, um, my goal was, as a filmmaker, not to flinch um, at whatever I witnessed, whatever I bore witness to. And I go back to this sense of responsibility that I felt. because these families had invited us and allowed us access to these really intimate moments. I felt the burden of responsibility to not flinch as a filmmaker and to, as much as possible, show their experience to the best of my ability in an authentic way, in a way that they would want me to. And we had long conversations about that. But to, I think, a different way of answering your question, it's hard to see a child suffering from extreme starvation. You're right. To see an emaciated child is a very difficult thing. And so, as a filmmaker and as a DP, I always think about the tension between something that's graphic but important, perhaps. If it's important and it happens to be graphic, then I don't want to not show it simply because it's graphic. Right now, if it's gratuitous, that's a whole nother thing, but I never want anything gratuitous in my films. And so I think the principles of good craftsmanship, of good composition, of seeking beauty in the field and how you capture something, how you shoot it, I think that principle of making something beautiful or seeking the beauty through composition, through covering actions of beauty, can create a tension, right? If it's a beautiful thing, if it's Omema, the child, giving a capful of water to a younger child, right? A starving child giving water to another starving child, there's a beauty in that action. And so I look for those moments of beauty and try to capture them beautifully, in order to keep the viewer engaged. So that's how I think of it often, is where can we find what is beautiful in this context, in this moment, to keep the viewer engaged, even if it's hard content. And I think if we do that successfully, viewers will be more likely to stay with you, right? To continue to look, even if it's hard to look.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think it's very, very important to look for that. And I saw that in Hunger Ward, which is why I love the movie so much, is that you were able to find those moments of beauty and emotion and clarity as well. And it wasn't just like we call it reportage here, like where you just verite style, you film everything and you go about it. You look for those details. And I think it's very important when you're close in a face that you stay on that beautiful face and you let it play out, and you let them approach, you let them come into the, this person's life, and the little details that you show, the little hands or things like that, it make it, heart, of course, touches your heart, and heart wrenching as well. But also there was a beauty in it, and I think it is important. And I always think about that whenever you're in very difficult circumstances, is how do you not scare away everybody? How do you find a cinematic artistic beauty in all this misery that makes people fall in love in a way with this kind of world, because they haven't seen it that way, they haven't thought of it that way. And that is, it's important, it's very important. And you achieved you did a remarkable job with that, which I was very grateful, because I knew it sort of had to watch it, because it's such an important topic, and I knew it was going to be hard. But you did a great job in just kind of taking us on this journey in a caring way. You eased us into it. You showed us the harshness of it, and at the same time, it was an artistic movie in a way. You had this cinematography and this cinema feeling with it, and that made it easier to watch. And I think it's always a important approach that not everybody's able to do. So well done. Now, what was your bigger plan in terms of what to do with this movie? Because obviously you go in, you risk your life, you go through 30 days, if it was, of an experience you will never leave behind, and there's a purpose, and that purpose needs to be, it needs to be taken very professionally. You have to know what you're doing with that in order to be able to achieve your goals. So maybe could you tell me, what were your goals, and what were you going to do with the movie in order to actually have an impact?
Yeah, you know, as an American, my intent with the film, knowing sort of my own government's complicity in the conflict, was to create a film that could be used as a vehicle for intervention, use as a vehicle to hopefully change our government's policy on Yemen, which has been so misguided for so long. So there was sort of this, you know, for me, a subtext as a director, knowing that I was hoping to create something that would obviously um, increase awareness for your average American about the war period, because I don't know how much coverage it gets there, Richard, but you know, it's sort of on again, off again here in the media, and I think your average American doesn't even know where Yemen is on the map. And so I wanted to create something that could increase awareness about what's happening in Yemen, and also be used by policymakers, be used by civil society groups, to raise awareness, and then to pose some really hard questions. Because that's another principle that I use in my work, is I always try to pose questions in the film. I don't feel like it's my job to answer those questions necessarily as a storyteller, but I want people to get to the end of the film and ask themselves, why are we funding this air campaign that's dropping bombs on children in Yemen? If people come to the end of the film and they want to go learn more, I feel like I've done part of my job. So that was the goal with the film, and really was to raise awareness here in the West about our government's complicity, and then to get people angry, hopefully angry enough to engage and want to change the status quo.
You must have been incredibly happy when President Biden took upon this topic, right, early on, and then stopped the Saudi support. I immediately thought, like, okay, here we have one director cheering right now.
Yeah.
Because this was your goal, right? This,
Yeah.
I think it was your number one goal.
It was, and we are, our whole film team, my producer, Mike Schurman, in particular, has been just a huge part of partnering with the couple hundred civil society groups as a coalition here in the US, which has been pushing the Biden administration, senators and Congress people for years now to change policy. And in the last 4 months in particular, we've been partnering really closely with this coalition to use the film to change policy. And so we have been a part of that movement. We can't take responsibility for, you know, Biden's pivot, but certainly we've been part of this group that's been pushing with the film. So we were very proud to have partnered with them, and to feel like, listen, the first important step has been made. So
oh, it's excellent. It's the one thing you want, and yeah, you want to be part of that movement, right? And I think your movie was certainly a very powerful tool in that toolbox of, like, how do you get an administration to act immediately, and whoever sees that movie, you know, will be, I don't know, emotionally so captivated by it that you, if you can do something about it, you will do something about it. So with this new administration, I think, you know, you hit jackpot, because they probably welcomed it also with open arms in a way that, and if you ever ask why we need to stop this Saudi support, well, watch the movie.
yeah,
You know, and that's a great great thing to have, and I think must be a powerful feeling. And I understand that it was part of a trilogy, so that you actually had, you know, this was the third film after 50 Feet from Syria was the first one, right? And then Lifeboat,
yeah.
and now this one. So are you thinking of moving to now a new, you know, you finished your trilogy, like what's, like, how do you go about it? Because, you know, I think you're a filmmaker with a mission, um, very heavily focused right now on refugees, which I find amazing and very important and powerful. I'm preparing actually a feature film now, narrative fiction, that I've been working on for 3 years about refugees as well. It's based on a book that I bought the rights to, and we're now turning it into a big movie, because I thought it was interesting, because I felt it's the only way to talk about this topic, this story, this particular story. It's going to be so difficult to get it out as a documentary, because people will be like, I can't watch it, it's too tragic, too sad. So I turned it into a love story in a refugee camp that, you know, then will will be very tough and include everything, but it's kind of a Romeo and Juliet story in one of the harshest environments of the world, because of this idea of making it watchable. I want people to be engaged and attracted to it by the millions. Otherwise, you're not going to have an impact.
Yeah.
So, what is your next chapter? Where are you going?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I don't have an answer to. You know, I was, you know, I said this the other day. I don't want to sound overly religious because I'm relatively secular, but I really was called to do this film and sort of called to do the entire trilogy. And you know how it is, Richard. When you set out to do a film, it's a commitment. It's something that when you make that decision, you know you're going to be with the topic for years and dedicate a lot of your heart and intellect and resources and time to. So it has to be something that, for me, I'm really dedicated to. I really believe I want to do. But that for me personally is really important. Like, is it one of these issues that I feel like as a global community we ought to be looking at? And that's what global displacement has been for me the last 6 years as I've done this trilogy. You know, 1% of the world's population is displaced. You probably know this. That's just horrifying. That percentage of the global population isn't living where they ought to be living, where they want to be living. And so maybe I'll continue with displacement. I don't know. But I'll know when the topic hits me, and I'll start my research, and I'll shoot you an email.
I have a question. How do you
want to come shoot this with me?
Yeah, well, I may have something in mind actually. How is it that you find the topic that you want to focus on? Because that immediately, like, because you know when you said when it hits me, I will know what it is. Are you actively out there scanning, searching, or do you wait until it comes to you? What is your approach there?
Well, I'm a pretty active reader. So yeah, my antennas are always sort of up, listening and looking. You know, I read the New York Times a lot, sources like that. But I think I just first I have to be ready, and you know you have to be open to the world, and I think now that Hunger Ward is out in the world with a distributor, I feel like I've achieved part of my aim finally with the film, was to get it in front of as many people as possible. So my antennas are going up again now, and I think I'm starting to scan. I also read a lot of books, and so sometimes ideas are generated out of books as well.
That's great you mentioned the New York Times, because it was a game changer for me. I found the idea to make the Ivory game from reading the New York Times, and I remember the moment that it actually hit me like a sledgehammer. It was on the 2nd of January 2013, the day after New Year's. I was waking up with a hangover, and I was like, oh yeah, whatever. So I'm gonna read the New York Times and have some coffee early morning. And I opened it, and there was an article about, it said 10 years to extinction of the African elephant. And I was like, what? And then it was this big article that basically said in 10 years elephants will be a thing of the past, and nobody will, like, your children would not be able to see elephants in the wild anymore. And I was like, why isn't like anybody heard about this, like da, da, da. And I was like, I ran to my wife. She was still kind of groggy herself, and I was like, we got to make a movie about the elephants. Like that's like it just kind of boom. And 2 years later we started doing the Ivory game. But it's this thing of like having this antenna out there and just being receptive. I think you have to, it's the right word, when you tune yourself into the right way, then, because you get so much news, right? You get so much input, but sometimes something just sticks and you're like, whoa, hold on a second. And then I usually scan it on like, do people know about this? Can this be made into a beautiful, strong, powerful, emotional film? And what will it take? And do I want to spend the next 2 to 3 years of my life with this? Very, very important question, because it will affect my life, my family, everything. And that's how I go about it these days myself. It becomes a mission and I'm not religious at all, so it's a bad word to use maybe, but it just, you get sucked in by this feeling of wanting to make a difference with the time that you have left on this planet, and you want to choose wisely. And it has to check a lot of boxes though before you go down that path. Like, not any topic is a great film.
Yeah.
So that's why, again, Hung Award, I don't know if I would have reacted to that when I would hear about it. I would have probably felt, you can't make a film about that because it's just not gonna be watchable, or it's just gonna be too much. Like, who wants to see dying, starving children? It's, it's this kind of thing that you hear when you go to an investor. Like, they're like, oh yeah, I mean, how are we like nobody's gonna watch it. I'm like, no, but I'm gonna make it different. It's gonna be all this. So you made it different, and you made it watchable, and congratulations. I think it's
Yeah.
a piece of art, and it's very, very important, and I hope it still goes a long way and gets the recognition it needs.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate it. It's been great talking with you, and I hope we can work together someday. It'd be fun.
Yep. As I said, I have an idea.
Okay. All right. Well, have fun with
Great.
your family, and
Thank you.
look forward to meeting you in person at some point.
Yes, hopefully. All right. Take
Bye-bye.
care.